Welcome to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I'm with Pete Lee, as always. And Pete, what is our topic today?
Well, we're coming to the end of 2021, and perhaps we're starting to think about some New Year's resolutions. And here on Chile Talk, I certainly would like to improve aspects of my Spanish pronunciation.
Okay, and perhaps you'd like to name one aspect of your Spanish pronunciation that you would like to improve.
Well, I think one of my biggest weaknesses is with the letter R. When I pronounce the letter R in English, it doesn't have an R sound in it, and neither in the Spanish ere, which has a double R. I can't pronounce either of those.
Right. I mean, most English speakers tend to just say right. It's like the Mapuche R, in fact. And I think a lot of indigenous American R's, actually. So we can claim a kind of, that R has a certain kind of right to be in this continent. So this is what's called rhoticism, which is there are two things. One is the way we pronounce the R, and the other is whether we pronounce it at all, which obviously at the end of words, I, as a Southern Englishman, and you, Pete, as an Australian, don't. I mean, just like, how do you pronounce the word far?
Yeah, far. Park
Right.
the car in Harvard Yard is the famous Bostonian Brahmin example.
Right, so Bostonians also speak that way in the States, or they used to. I'm not sure they do now, but that's another subject. So neither of us pronounce R's at the ends of syllables. So we are not rhotic or rhotic. There are British accents, English accents where they do. In the United Kingdom, in the British Isles, there's the Scottish accent, also the Irish accent in the British Isles. That's right. Most Americans. But even those who do pronounce more R's than others when speaking English struggle with the Spanish R, right?
Yes, it's difficult. I find particularly I have a problem as an Australian. I'm not only non-rhotic, I don't pronounce the R, rho of course is the Greek R, but I'm non-lambdic. I don't pronounce L's at the end of a syllable. So for example, my native city, Melbourne, is pronounced with the Melburnian accent, Melbourne. And nobody in Melbourne knows that's how they pronounce it. They know that the second syllable is a little bit weird. It's not born, but they don't know about the first syllable. So I'm from Melbourne, and I can't pronounce final R, and I can't pronounce final L. R in Spanish.
Let me just interrupt and say that makes Melbourne the Antipodean mirror image of Bristol, which was originally called Bristow, but Bristolians add an L at the end of every word ending with a vowel. I think any vowel or just certain ones. So Bristol became Bristol. So all the missing L's from Melbourne, went to Bristol.
Yes, that's very probable. That's very probable. And we don't know exactly how Lord Melbourne pronounced his name, because he was born in London and grew up in the home counties, I think in Hertfordshire. He was probably non-rhotic and possibly non-lambdic as well, as a lot of people who speak what we now call estuary English around the Thames estuary.
That's right. That's difficult because British noblemen, even still then, did often have did speak some version of their local dialect. They did not necessarily all speak a standard English. But anyway, that's a totally separate topic. Now, Spanish R's, there's the R, like loro. That's about as good as I can do it. Loro, meaning parrot. And there's what's written as a double R, but Spanish speakers don't hear it as a double R. They hear it as a completely separate letter.
Yeah.
So if you say choro, meaning like it means different things, can mean like great in Chilean slang, choro, that's really choro, it's great. Instead of chorro, meaning like spurt or like squirt, they don't just hear that as a kind of inadequate version of chorro. It's a totally different sound. They just don't know what you're trying to say, which to us is completely baffling, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, the Chilean single R for me is a mystery, and the double R, well, it's like trying to find the G spot inside my own mouth. It's far beyond me.
That's it. And it's used a lot because not only is it written as such in a lot of words, but I think in any word that starts with an R, it will only be written as a single R, but is actually pronounced like the double R.
Yes. And of course, if you begin a letter with the letter R, they pronounce it as a rolled double R.
Exactly.
Very notoriously in Chilean broadcasting. They do very exaggerated initial R sounds.
Yeah, well, Chilean broadcasters have an accent all of their own, which is neither the Chilean accent nor any other accent that one knows of, with its own intonation that's full of enthusiasm.
Yes.
And it's hard to reproduce. We might have to at least link, I think, a bit of Chilean broadcasting. I don't think we could possibly do it justice if we tried to
share the fame. Yes, we can share the fame.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, and so this stuff is important. I mean, well, I was going to say that Spanish speakers care a lot about their language. I think it's true to say that the Real Academia Española, the Royal Spanish Academy, cares a lot about the language, and they're listened to, with a certain degree of respect, because in Spanish, as in German, there are endless little fiddly changes to spelling, endless little rationalizations of spelling. I think the Germans pretty much just accept them immediately. The Germans can actually be quite anti-authority. I remember when it came to the smoking ban, there was a big rebellion. But I think on the matter of spelling, I could be wrong. I don't think there's much resistance. But in Spanish-speaking countries, there's a famous case. Back in 2010, in its last big revision, the Royal Academy, Spanish Academy, decreed that the accent was to be removed from solo when it was an adjective meaning only, as opposed to when it's an adjective meaning alone. And they'd already modified their advice on that. For, I think, since about 1880 or 1890, the advice was that its use was customary and acceptable, that there was no really good grounds for it, because it would be pronounced solo with or without the accent. The accent is where the pronunciation would naturally fall anyway. And then the advice became slightly confusing, but essentially they modified it so that you were only to use it in cases of ambiguity, when you couldn't tell if it meant only or alone. And now in 2010, they just, blew everything out of the water. They said, it's not to be used even in cases of ambiguity. Do you use it? Because a lot of people have held out.
Yes, I will use it, partly because I'm never too sure whether to say solamente or solo with an accent. So I'm always very mindful of it. I'm somewhat self-conscious of which sounds better in a particular expression. I believe they mean pretty much the same thing.
I believe you can use them really interchangeably. Just as solamente sounds a bit kind of clumsy, in certain, just because of the number of syllables in certain contexts.
I think we, as second language or second or subsequent language users of Spanish, get very hung up on certain little things. I mean, one of the banes of my life is por, meaning on behalf of, and para, meaning in order to, or they have other meanings as well. And it can be very confusing for English speakers in particular to acquire the correct usage of those two words. Of course, if you don't pronounce the R, and a lot of Chileans don't pronounce the R in those words, they say por and pa instead of por and para. And of course, there's also the word pues, which in Chilean is famously po. It can be quite confusing to to learn and pick up which to use in a particular usage.
Yeah, I think there are whole sections of grammar books. Actually, that's not a little thing. That's a big thing. There are entire sections of grammar books dealing with the difference between por and para. And I say nothing is little, really, at least to the Royal Academy. In fact, there's actually I mentioned these people who persist in using the accent on solo. They include actually leading members of the Royal Spanish Academy, but writers as opposed to grammarians or whatever they're called, linguists, have actually refused to go along with this. And there's actually a name for this class of human beings, and they're called solotildistas.
Yes.
Accent, solo being solo. So people who insist on using the accent on solo are called solotildistas. So because this obsession, this great love of the nitty-gritty of language, well, it's a very Anglo-Saxon thing as well. I mean, I think the Americans invented the spelling bee. I don't think other countries have spelling competitions, and perhaps they don't really need to. Or perhaps they do in Spanish-speaking countries, because they do struggle, don't they?
We'll have to go into spelling in Spanish, which seems to the untrained eye to be really fairly phonetic, and people have a lot of problems with it. We'll go into that in another video.
Okay. Yeah.
I think in our case, I mean, we're not going to get all pronunciations right. We're not going to get all written forms right, although we probably are more confident at writing than we are at speaking it, in our case, I think. But we probably owe it to our listeners and to people in general to try a bit harder with some of our pronunciation and improve. And that's certainly one of my goals for 2022. Hopefully we'll be making some more Chile talk in Castellano for people out there.
Okay, so that could be a possible elocution lessons next this coming year. Yeah. That's it. Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much, as always, for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Happy New Year.